Today's episode is brought to you by United Faith Leaders, the host of the Faith Leader Directory. Be found at unitedfaithleaders.com. Hello, friends, and welcome to the next episode of the Coffee Pot Fellowship Podcast. My name is Jay McNeil, and our guest today is the Reverend Dr. Eric Jackson. Well, welcome to the show, Eric. Thanks for being here. This is live. We are live streaming, so people are going to hear a little more quirks and imperfections than usual. So I appreciate you playing the live version with us.
No problem.
That's right. Thank you. So, Dr. Jackson, that is one of my professors, so that's why I had to pause. Dr. Jackson.
Well, not Dr. yet. I'm still a graduate. I'm still a student at Hartford Seminary.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so you have your Master of Divinity from Drew Theological Seminary, and you are still working in progress on your Doctor of Ministry at Hartford Seminary.
Yes.
Okay. So, and you are the senior pastor at Brookside Congregational Church in Manchester, New Hampshire, right?
Yep, that's it. Correct.
And so I will say that Brookside Congregational Church is a member of the United Church of Christ. So are you UCC?
Yes.
So this is really cool. We have not had a lot of UCC pastors, which surprises me. And we have had not many people from New England at all, but we haven't had anybody from New Hampshire. So I really appreciate you breaking us into a bigger territory.
Oh, you're quite welcome. This is exciting. As you probably can tell, I wasn't born in New England. I was born in New Hampshire. But this is an exciting opportunity to introduce New Hampshire, represent New Hampshire this way.
Right. Where were you born?
I was born in New York City.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, now, you're a man of color, but I was going to say, that's not what you're saying. You're saying that your accent sounds like New York, right? Is there a New Hampshire accent that I don't know I should recognize?
Oh, there is a New Hampshire accent that you should recognize. But matter of fact, the first time I came to New Hampshire to visit, I was a guest preacher. And I thought it was just one universal New England accent. I was sitting on the lake with some church members, and they corrected me right away, and they told me there is a difference between how a Bostonian talks, somebody from New Hampshire, and then Vermont and Maine, and they broke down all the categorizations for me.
Could they demonstrate?
Yes, but I don't remember. I don't remember the generalizations.
I won't put you on the spot. They were able to use the accent for Vermont and
New Hampshire and Maine.
Of course they can, right? Excellent. So I'm adding sort of a question. I want to see if I can make this part of how people hear the Coffee Pot Fellowship podcast. So as part of our introduction, I wonder if there are hashtags you might use to describe yourself.
Sure. Coffeefiend.
Ooh.
Activist. Pastor.
And so the other question we like to ask folks as we get going how do you like your coffee?
The way I'm having it right now, with nothing in it and in a mug. In a ceramic mug.
I had coffee with a colleague yesterday at Starbucks, and he came away with his in a ceramic mug, and I thought that was quite unique for Starbucks. Yep.
Yeah, I had a ceramic mug from New York, from a Starbucks I got in New York, and I kept it with me for over 10 years. And when I moved to New Hampshire, it was here with me, ironically, and then right when I first got here, it literally broke.
Well, that's what happens with stuff we use, right?
Yep.
So
use it until we can't use it anymore.
That's right. All right, well, so the coffee fiend likes his coffee black and in a ceramic mug.
Yes.
Okay. So I did discover you because of what looked like some sort of activism to me. As I was trying to connect with folks in the state of New Hampshire, I found the Freedom New Hampshire website, and they have a quote from you. Now, it looks like you were at a different church at the time, Smith Memorial.
Yes.
And the quote says, "I believe in the radical inclusive love of God. This love extends to all of creation, including our transgender brothers and sisters, and calls me to support transgender equality in New Hampshire. At Smith Memorial UCC, we are proud to welcome all, in all caps, all of God's children to our congregation. And so I thought that sounded like seriously radical welcome, right?
Right. And my understanding of Jesus and what Jesus did when Jesus walked the earth, it wasn't about having a select group of people who are part of the dominant culture. Jesus, the example Jesus gave us was bringing people together who were not on the margins and saying, no, we all should be included. There's a place for everyone at God's table. So that includes the people who are rejected and marginalized in our society. I mean, for me, it's even taking a look at even who Jesus chose to be around him. You had someone who identified as Jewish. You had somebody who was not one who was not Jewish, somebody who was a fisherman, another who was a physician. He had women with him in active leadership roles. I believe he had women in active leadership roles and serving. So you had a plethora, a cacophony of people, that were with Jesus and who were on the margins of society. And Jesus says, no, there is room at this table for everyone. And this is the example that during the time the Roman Empire and Jerusalem should be following, that there is room for all at God's table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I need to have another podcast where we dive into the deep study of what's there and really plumb that, because that's awesome stuff. And I agree with you. And I think that it's always fascinated me at my seminaries, how, because of the way I expected to find stuff in Scripture, I would read right over the top of things that had so much content, right? I took stuff for granted and I didn't realize the lenses with which I was reading, right? Mm-hmm. So, well, before we get too far deep, I guess, how about if we turn towards those stories? And the first thing I like to ask folks is if they have a favorite story. And this can be either one of your own or one that you've heard.
For me, sometimes I think a lot of times why you see a lot of people doing stuff is because it's what's happening now. For example, I'll stand with a group like Black Lives Matter or care about someone who happened to be of African descent who got beaten by a police officer unjustly because it's what's happening now, or we'll approach from a very intellectual, or use our intellect to justify why we should belong to something. But for me, my spark as my story of really when I became really what I would say really became interested in becoming an activist, for me was when my deepest need connected with my deepest sense of call, if you will. So I want to share that story. So when I was in college, I was a student. I earned my undergraduate degree at the City College of New York. And during that time, at one time, City College was totally free. It was a totally free institution, academic institution that people could attend without having to endure the high costs of a private education. And yes, they could still receive a quality education. So that model necessarily wasn't always going to be sustainable over the years. So they started imposing a tuition, like you see at many state colleges and state universities. So, but then they started, then there was an effort to raise the tuition. And City College, what I loved about the place was there was this rich, deep spirit of people who were activists and weren't afraid to speak truth to power, if you will, to be able to stand up and raise their voices with courage. So somebody came to me one day and said, look, they're getting ready to raise our tuition again. And this is going to have a drastic impact on us. And they started to explain to me why this was a problem. And it made sense to me about how unjust it was to engage in an insane tuition hike, considering that the institution was for people who wanted to get a college education, but not necessarily did not have the financial means to afford an elite private institution. So I felt it went against the grain of that, and also it would deeply impact me. So I went to a meeting. They had an organizing meeting on campus, and they said we're going to go to Albany, and we're going to make our voices known, make our voices heard. So it was in that moment that I went to the meeting, the collective people that were in the room, that collective and the people who were willing to go to Albany made me really think that, wow, yes, to the injustices that we see in the world, the power of people can make a difference and impact change. And you don't need a ton of money to do it either. So we got on that bus and we went up to Albany, and we made our voices known. And it did have impact. So from then on in, it helped me to really believe in the power of nonviolent direct action and the transformative power that organizing has to make a difference in our community and in the world.
Yeah, I am learning that lesson later than you did. I feel like people on this show always hear me saying that I'm late to the conversation, but at least I feel like I'm getting there. In the last 3 years, there have been so many direct actions, so many attempts to get down to and actually get to various levels of government and talk to the officials and let our voices be heard. I mean, I think it took me a long time to just learn to be assertive in my small world, get alone to bind with some other folks and get out there and help influence and let our representatives know where we were at. And so that's been really cool. I went to school, my undergrad I'm from upstate New York. And so I went to school in Schenectady, so outside of Albany. So I'm familiar with Albany's territory, but I wasn't, my activism hadn't started yet. I had to stop and think. And my first graduate school is where I first got myself out on a quad all by myself with a microphone and speaker. So I was at a Catholic school. There's a whole nother story, but I was at a Catholic school trying to raise awareness about the LGBTQ community. And that Catholic school didn't want to allow for a student group of LGBT folks.
Mm.
They kept getting rejected, and I was going, I don't understand. So that was my first interaction. But there were some allies and some nuns. So we all have our beginnings.
That's right, allies and nuns, and it sounded like something, something happened.
Yeah. So the next thing I want to do is ask you about a more difficult question. Can you share with us a biggest trial or blunder story from your own life?
Biggest trial, I would say, that comes to mind is when I was transitioning from the associate pastor role to that of a lead pastor. And it was a very intentional transition for me. The senior pastor who I was working with, who was a fantastic mentor, who I keep in touch with to this very day, but it was, he was like, you've been here 7 years now. It's time for you to start thinking. And, you've kind of done well, at a certain point, in order to grow, you might not necessarily need to be in the same place that you're in. And you have such amazing gifts. And I wanted you to think about applying to this church. So naturally, I started this process for me to think about transitioning and where I was, because really I was like going through, it was not mundane, so to speak, but I was really just starting to, every issue that happened, I would just be able to work through it like clockwork. And I was just continuing to do that maintenance, it became maintenance, if you will, maintenance ministry. And it was true that I wasn't, I had, all that I could get from this church, I got. So I started thinking about that, but then I hit a dry patch. I was sitting in Italy, and I just realized that, it was like there was so much uncertainty about what was next because I was going through the interview process, and Lord knows at times, you know how it is with churches' decision-making and search committees. They move slower than molasses at times. But not, so at times they can move really slow. So there's so much, there was just so much uncertainty about what's next for me and where I was actually going to go. So it really forced me to really think about who I was in the midst of all of that, because in the midst of the uncertainty, it was so frustrating that it really just forced me to think about who am I and who am I, because I had to keep reminding myself about who I was and who I was called, where I was called to be. And, it was at one point, there was a chance that I could have wound up all the way in Hawaii. And that was like terrifying, because going from New York all the way to Hawaii, that was a possibility. And there was a plethora of possibilities. But I just started thinking about, what the gifts I could bring, what life would be like in that context. And there was just so much uncertainty, because all of my possibilities were in a variety of totally different places. So the uncertainty really forced me to come to terms with who I am. And it was running. I was sitting out in the fields in Italy, out in grass in Italy somewhere. And, it just really in that moment was an aha moment where I had to really come to terms with who I am. And it really forced me to accept that and to be able to project, and then ultimately be able to project that. I had a sense of where I was called to be and called to do. So I really didn't. So the first offer that came to me, I said, no, thank you. And some people who were in my position might have thought, well, you must be crazy, because I have colleagues who left seminary and, they weren't called to lead pastor roles. And they would have done it would have made them so happy to get a call from anywhere.
Right. You sort of accept that first.
Yeah.
I feel like I've been there.
Yeah, it's a place I think we've all everybody goes through at some point or other, if you're in the context of you're in the field of ministry.
Well, I appreciate that story. So as we get ready to turn towards a happiest ministry moment, if you want to, you are welcome to mute your microphone while we do a little commercial break, and then we'll come back and hear that story, if you don't mind. I've been wondering, and I wrote down some questions before this podcast, and I said, what faith leader doesn't want to be a part of United Faith Leaders? Am I right? United Faith Leaders. Isn't that what we all want to be? United Faith Leaders is where everyone can go to find a faith leader. How can we be faith leaders if we aren't putting ourselves where people are looking for us? How can we be faith leaders if we're not putting ourselves out there in the public in the ways that people want to find us? Imagine people within a 5-mile radius of you, the pastor you, seminary graduate you, minister you, searching the internet because they're having a crisis, some level of minor or major crisis. Before they walk in the doors of a church, pick up a phone or send you an email. They want to know something about who they're calling. They want to know something about the person they're considering making themselves vulnerable to. Should faith leaders meet people halfway? Should faith leaders meet them on the sidewalk out in front of the church, figuratively? Should faith leaders be willing to meet people for a first or a second conversation on neutral turf? That neutral territory is what United Faith Leaders gives people looking for faith leaders, a way to safely begin an introduction with a faith leader. Where the relationship goes from there depends on how well every faith leader makes the love of God manifest. Do you have the kindness of a chaplain when you meet new souls? Then you might be a great fit for United Faith Leaders. You might be a chaplain. You might be retired, half-time, full-time, bivocational, a music worship leader, a Christian pastor, a rabbi, an imam, an associate pastor, senior pastor, solo pastor, youth pastor, religious author, or speaker. If you are a faith leader who can love the people who ask for your services with kindness and grace, then I return to my original question. What faith leader doesn't want to be a part of United Faith Leaders? Find out more at unitedfaithleaders.com. And in the description right now, you can actually get 20% off your first year with a listing in the Faith Leader directory. That's on the Coffee Pot Fellowship Facebook page. You can watch this interview live. And in the description, you'll see there's a discount code for 20% off your first year. If you want to just look at the website where everybody's listed, you can go to unitedfaithleaders.com. All right. And we are back with the soon-to-be Reverend Dr. Eric Jackson. How long till you finish that doctorate? Do you know?
Roughly about a year.
Okay.
That's that's what I like about the D-Min program, especially at Hartford Seminary. One, it's real strong emphasis on progressive Christian ministry and multi-faith engagement. But also, what I like about the D-Min is that you do the work in your context.
Okay.
So it's heavily rooted in your context. So you're not coming out with a bunch of understanding a particular theory and how to apply that theory, but you're looking at how looking more from you're more on the ground with your folks.
Yeah, it does seem that every D-Min program, Doctor of Ministry program for listeners, does have heavy practice involved. You do most of the work in the context of your ministry, and that's often a requirement of being in the program, is that you have a ministry context to be practicing in.
It's very oriented to where you're practicing ministry at, which helps a lot because you're talking about what you're doing.
Right. Well, that's great stuff. So my last story question is to ask you if you have a happiest ministry moment that you'd be willing to share with us.
I would say happiest ministry moment would be when I was serving in Hillsborough I had church members. They were wonderful about keeping me accountable to talking about justice issues. As in most of our churches that come out of the congregational tradition, you will have folks from all sides of the spectrum. So they would hold me accountable to talking about justice issues, which I appreciated and loved. One of the things that they did, one of the things that somebody asked me was, well, you heard about the shooting in Charleston? Oh my God, that's awful. Now, what are you going to say about that, Eric? What are you going to do about that? And, what are we going to do about that? We got to do something about that. How can we keep silent about that? And especially you as a Black pastor. And I'm like, yeah, because at times though, you always try to be careful so you don't become the object.
Right. You don't want to push your issue, right?
Not so much pushing my issue as it is, me being the embodiment of dealing with race in the congregation. You want that to come up organically.
Yeah. Not
that we're doing this for the sake of our pastor.
Right.
So we went and I talked to some of my colleagues. We had a visitor come from our United Church of Christ in Zimbabwe. And we had other clergy that came to say hello to him. He was the president of the United Church of Christ in Zimbabwe. And he was our guest for the weekend. And he preached at our church. And so I had my colleagues in town that were there. And I talked to them, I said, well, you heard about Charleston. And we came up with this idea, why don't we do a vigil in the park? And I was just so amazed at how easy it was to organize that. We organized that in a day. And major news outlets from across the state showed up. And I was just shocked at how much this town that was 98, 99% white, they really, it was a deep matter of concern. And in that moment in the park, it was an eye-opening moment for me, really about really what this is all about. In that, we can actually build. I think really helped me to realize we can truly build inclusive and beloved and inclusive community right here in our churches. And that's something that could happen in congregations across the country. So it was something that it just opened my eyes up so much that yes, this is possible. And out of that, what I started working on up the road some years, probably a couple of years later, and more recently, was a framework to help churches be able to become multiracial congregations by doing that inner work. To understand about how, in a place that was free of judgment, do that inner work to build inclusive congregations. So I'm working with a church now in Brookline, Massachusetts, and I've been their multiracial consultant for a year, and they want me to come back again next year. And we've been able to do some amazing stuff together to really help to build this inclusive, to help them become even more inclusive congregation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's important work, obviously. Good. Well, I'm glad that they're reaching out and want to do the work. And it is also neat to see some things can come together quickly, that organic quality.
So it just amazed me, though, really about how much people do care about these issues, and they are, that people really do care, and that these that these concerns are shared concerns, and really how others, that this work of justice, there's a part we can all play in making, to really building that inclusive, beloved community.
Mm-hmm. Amen. I want to say, teach.
Not trying to do. I'm just telling the story. That's it.
Well, thank you for all of that, the story pieces. Before we go, is there anything that you want to promote explicitly?
Only thing is, if your congregation is really wants to build a community where all can be included and are interested in building a truly multicultural, multiracial congregation, and you'd like my support, do not hesitate to contact me, and I will be glad to resource you in any way that I possibly can, because this work matters to me, and I believe it matters to us for our future.
Mm-hmm. And what is the best way for folks to get in touch with you?
So Pastor, Pastor, at Brookside, BrookSideCC.org. So Pastor at BrookSideCC.org.
Okay, I put that in the comments. Now we need to get you a public figure page on Facebook or a website or something. Always get you, so that in case you move to a new call, we want to be able to find you. So, but we will put that in the show notes. And FYI, for Eric and anybody else, we will update show notes page anytime we get updates. So if Eric does move to another congregation, we can update that page so that you can find him there. So, and we will put that information, as always, at coffeepotfellowship.com. It's www.coffeepotfellowship.com. Eric, definitely appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. And thanks for being on the live program, right? This is right out there in the public. So that was a little scarier for me than getting a recording and getting to edit it. So this is out there live as is. Thanks for doing this with us.
Okay. You're quite welcome, and thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor.
Yeah. So thank you to Eric again, and thanks always to our listeners for tuning in, and thanks for living into who you are fully called to be. Today's episode was brought to you by United Faith Leaders, the host of the Faith Leader Directory. Be found at unitedfaithleaders.com.